All right, AP US Government students, hopefully you did well on quiz number 5 on your phones. All right, you need to have out your green packet, page 75, and then your blue packet, page 63. 75 green, 63 blue. Mr. Wood, if you want to pause it here quick while they're doing that, you can certainly do so. All right, everyone. This first lecture is not going to be a ton in terms of, things to write down in your green packet as you can see. It's just going to be page 75. But I want to kind of go over, foreshadow what you're going to be looking at in your blue packet with the Federalist number 70. Now, the Federalist number 70, not one of the more well-known Federalist papers. 51 and 10 are pretty much the gold standard, but the AP writers chose the Federalist number 70 because it gets into a lot of the expectations that Hamilton, the writer, had of what the executive, the presidency, would look like. And certainly Hamilton, his mentor was George Washington. I think we know that now. Many of you have seen Hamilton, the Broadway hit. That I can't help but think that as he wrote this, he had to be thinking about that first president being George Washington, being his mentor. It was pretty much, I think, throughout much of our country, a foregone conclusion that that first president, that first executive would be George Washington. So I think he has that in the back of his head while he's writing this. So let's go through these questions here that you're going to write down on page 75 in your green packet, and then you guys can have some time to work on the document dive number 5. All right, first off, Alexander Hamilton desired an executive who would balance the power of Congress. So go ahead and get that down. Hamilton argued for a strong executive because Hamilton is going to believe that yes, we're going to have some checks and balances and separation of powers, and we're not going to allow this person to become a tyrant. And of course, Hamilton envisioned George Washington. He never believed that he would become that person. But he argued for a strong executive because there was a need for a strong executive for certain decisions to be made. For certain decisions to be made in our government. Okay, and you're going to see that as you read what Hamilton writes in the Federalist number 70. Again, I'm just kind of foreshadowing some things that you will see in the document. Finally, Hamilton is going to argue for one executive because he believes, how should we say that? As you read the document, you're gonna understand. But basically, he believes that 2 executives would be too many. They would not work well together. They would play off on each other. So get something down to that extent. And you're thinking to yourself, gosh, Mr. P, one executive. You have to remember, though, that as you look back upon our history and the document dive you're going to see with what Hamilton writes, the republic that our founding fathers are looking back upon is the Romans. The Romans, 2,000 and some years ago, that's a republic that they're really kind of basing our republic upon. And if you know back to that world history, of which you may or may not, but the Romans during the time of the republic had two executives, 2 councils who worked together to have the executive power within the republic. So you're going to see when you read this that Hamilton is going to talk about, no, even though they had 2, we just need 1, and here's why. Okay? Mr. Wood, you can pause it now, and the students can go ahead and quietly read the document dive number 5 on 63, 64, and 65 of their blue packet. I would say maybe give them about 3 minutes to read quietly on their own. and then you can have them get into groups to answer those questions after that quiet reading time. And then certainly feel free to go over those with the students. So you can go ahead and pause it here and complete that. All right, students, now that you've finished the document dive, you guys can now go back to your green packet and let's fill out the rest of the stuff on page 75. All right, qualifications, go ahead and get these down. And again, you guys can see these are things that you pretty much know already. A couple of these things are kind of weird, maybe in your mind, but they're things that are in the Constitution. For example, natural born citizen. This is really the only position that requires it. It's not required in Congress, but it's seemingly required of this position. All right? And I mentioned that there with birthers against Obama, and those were the groups of people that believe potentially that Obama was not born in the United States, and thus that disqualified him from being a natural-born citizen who could be a president. And that was part of the reason why he showed the birth certificate from, I believe, the state of Hawaii, where it was that he was born. Resident of the U.S. for 14 years. That's a strange one. I don't know why the Founding Fathers picked that, but the essence is it doesn't even have to be the last 14 years. We look at Ike, President Eisenhower. He was in Europe for the previous years, fighting World War II before he became president. So it's not one of those things that seemingly it's just really seemingly any 14 years. And then we'll see that people like Barack Obama, people like Bill Clinton, they cannot be president again because they've already been elected twice. They've already been elected twice. And those same qualifications would apply to them if they were ever trying to seek the office again, which would disqualify them. All right, terms here. You guys can see that this isn't going to blow your mind here. We know 4-year terms. What is interesting, though, is that Washington started a 2-term, 8-year tradition. A tradition. All right, so every president followed this tradition, but one who, maybe you want to pause it here and kind of see what they're thinking, Mr. Wood. All right, FDR, my grandmother's favorite president. So you can see him there in the middle. Love this picture. Love this picture. One of the few pictures that's out there of World War II that I've ever seen that's in not in black and white, but it's in color. And then you can see Churchill there on the left, our president there in the middle. One of the few pictures that's ever out there of him below the waist. As you know, he had issues and problems walking from having polio, I believe, at a young kid. Feel free, Mr. Wood, to speak to any of that. And then look at old Joseph Stalin there on the right, stoic as he was, and the killer of millions of his own people. All right, so we had a president serve more than 2 terms, FDR. He was elected for 4. The 22nd Amendment comes along later in the 1950s because we come to this conclusion that it's just too long for any one person to serve. We need to put this 2-term tradition of Washington's into the Constitution so you can see what it is that they put into the 22nd Amendment. So you guys can read that. Maybe you want to pause that here, Mr. Wood, so they can take a look at that and then think about the answer to this question. So based upon that, what is the longest any president can serve today? Go ahead and pause it there if you want to. Seemingly written by a lawyer. My goodness. All right. How could you have made that any harder? But 10 years. All right. So you could serve up to 2 years of someone else's term plus 8 years of your 2 terms for a total of 10. But if you serve seemingly more than half of someone else's term, so your vice president, there's more than 2 years left on their term, you can then only serve the remaining 2 plus whatever it may be years, 3 years, whatever it may be, and then 1 more term. If it's 2 years or less left on that term, you can still serve 2 4-year terms after that, which could theoretically, technically be 10 years total. All right, so that's the end of lecture 1, everyone.